The topic we are focusing on is the Dust Bowl during the Great Depression.
This was a severe drought that the Central States suffered through. The land started to dry out when the rain completely stopped falling in Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Kansas in 1931.
Once the land dried out, it was harder to grow crops and feed animals. Without food for animals, they would begin to die, thus cutting the food supply. Also, the land was dried out as a result of the drought that went on for years and years, so farmers could not grow crops.
Not only did the dry soil affect the growth of crops, but so did insect infestations. The insects would eat the plants, if there were any growing, to live longer. Because of the food supply growing smaller and smaller, the prices went higher and higher for goods.
Since people that lived in that area were mostly poor, they had trouble feeding their families, resulting in many deaths from starvation. Millions of people migrated westward away from the drought zones in search of work. It was hard for them, though, to find work during the Great Depression.
People continued to abandon their homes to become migrant laborers when the dust storms began to roll in 1932. They also protected themselves, attempting to hang wet sheets above in front of their doors and taping their windows closed, but it did not succeed in keeping the particles of dust out.
Once the dust started to get heavy, schools, businesses, and churches closed completely. Also, people spit out large globs of dust day by day.
A lot of citizens in these states stayed in their town hoping for a turning point. Some prayed for rain, and others went in for more drastic measures. Parents would cover their children's and their own mouths with pieces of cloth to keep the dust from gathering up in their bodies.
Judge Cohen remembers a contract that members had to sign that said, "In the absence of an act of God, serious family injury, or some other emergency, I pledge to stay here as the last man and do everything I can to help other men remain in this country. We promise to stay here till hell freezes over and skate out on ice."
The skies would darken for days, and even the most well-sealed homes could have a thick layer of dust on furniture. In some places, the dust would drift like snow, covering farmsteads.
According to a man named Louis Sanchez, who lived in the Dust Bowl, says, "Over half my schoolmates died because their lungs had gotten damaged by dust."
Black Sunday occurred on April 14, 1935. There had been a few dust storms before then, but in mid-afternoon that Sunday, people said to have experienced a huge black cloud approaching them. People in cars tried to beat the storm home. Ed and Ada Phillips of Boise City had to find a safe place to settle while the storm passed.
They found an abandoned adobe hut where about 10 others were already huddled in a small 2-room shelter. They sat for about 4 hours in the dark, fearing what was to come.
The wall of dust was traveling at a deadly pace of about 40 miles per hour. Temperatures were dropping at a fast and steady rate. The panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma were hit the hardest. The winds were reached 60 miles per hour. People said that for a few moments they could not see their own hand in front of their face. Many people thought the end of the world had come.
A National Weather Service observer in Kenton, Oklahoma says about the storm, "Severe dust storms hit at 4:20 p.m., turning afternoon brightness immediately into the midnight darkness and absolutely zero visibility. It was totally dark and impossible to see without searchlight for at least 15 minutes. The storm came from the north and northeast and traveled at a very great speed."
The Dust Bowl got its name the day after Black Sunday, April 15, 1935. The dust storms of Black Sunday were the result of a dry, cold front that moved southward across the Great Plains during the day, reaching the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles by 5 p.m.
Robert Geiger filed a report from Garman, Oklahoma. The story, which was published on the following day, stated, "3 little words achingly familiar on a Western farmer's tongue. Rural life today in the Dust Bowl of the continent, if it rains."
In 1938, an extensive amount of work was done replowing land, replanting trees into shelter belts, and other methods of conservation were done, thus cutting the amount of soil blowing by 65%.
There was a storm in 38 known as the Snuster. This was a very big storm that was a mix of snow and dust that caused a massive amount of damage and a lot of people suffering. The drought continued after this.
1938 was the year that had the most wind erosion. Over 10 million acres, a shocking 5 inches of topsoil, had blown away, and the additional 2.5 inches over another 13.5 acres.
In fall of the next year, rain began to fall, ending the drought that lasted for a long and treacherous 9 years.
In the next few years, rain began to fall a lot more frequently, causing crops such as wheat, barley, and some fruits to grow just as fast as they died. Prices skyrocketed during this time for wheat.
By the time 1940 rolled around, approximately 2.5 million people had moved out of the states affected by the Dust Bowl in the past 9 years.
The government started helping the farmers by giving them seeds and money. The most valuable lesson was to take care of the land.
Even though they worked to make the land better, there were more dry spells in the 1950s, 60s, and late 70s, but nothing nearly as big as the drought that plagued the world known as the Dust Bowl.